Welcome back to the Urban Monk. Pedram back with you. I had a question and I didn't know the answer, and basically it revolved around saying, what the hell is this water thing all about? Water is scarce. There are wars being fought over water all over the world right now. We're not as hit with it in the United States, but we're fighting wars. We are sending fighter planes to deal with things that are happening in Syria, Darfur. Water has become a very big problem, and the scarcity of clean water is an issue. So our executive producer, Carl, went and found a genius in John Lambie, who's a hydrologist and a geologist. MIT pedigree, founded ePure Solutions, and is basically the guy that cities are calling saying, hey, come and help us figure out this water issue. And so I got him on the show and really got a chance to geek out. Allow me that. I got to ask a lot of the questions that I've been wondering about. So I hope you enjoy geeking out with me and someone really smart who actually had answers about water. It's a big problem. And you know what I learned is it ain't as bad as I thought. So he actually brought a lot of enthusiasm and optimism to a problem that I thought we were in dire straits over. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot going on the planet, but I think you're going to enjoy hearing what John had to share. So I want to start with a stat here that is just pretty compelling. At 783 million people do not have access to clean and safe water, which is 11% of the global population. And that's double the population of the United States, Canada, and Mexico combined. So water, it's a thing, right? And so I just want to talk to that number real quick. That's just under 1 billion people who have issues with clean water. And I'd like to start with that because that kind of opens up our conversation on the scale of this issue and how important it is and it's going to be.
I've worked with Water for People who are focused on that very one issue, which is the lack of access to clean and safe water, fresh water, for an awful lot of people around the globe. The awkward truth is that there's an even bigger number of people lack access to sanitation, which leads to some of that lack of safety in water supply. So some of this is social engineering and not just physical.
Sure.
Yeah, teaching people not to graze cattle in their water source because the cattle will defecate, that sort of thing.
Yeah, clean water. I know we've done a bunch of stuff with Waves for Water, which is a little foundation that goes out and does water purification in the third world. And some of the stories that I'd heard of people who basically spend their entire day fetching water and then fetching firewood to boil and purify the water. I mean, it's just, that's all you do. It's just, you live in subsistence, you live in the struggle to effectively survive, because if you don't have water, party's over. So how did you get into all this? Like, it's obviously a big topic. You're
it's really a short, simple answer. I grew up here in Portland, Oregon, and while I was a youth in the 60s, the Cuyahoga River basically in Cleveland, Ohio, caught fire twice. And I said, there's something wrong with that picture. And at some level, it just spoke to me deeply. I didn't even know it at the time. So when I did my academic studies, I came out of that and I go, what do I want to do with myself? I'm a geologist and I'm trained in fluid mechanics. I could chase petroleum, but I think instead I'll chase what's up with that water problem thing. And in my research, I was offered some studies that I rejected, such as figuring out the projected velocity needed to send sewage off the tip of Cape Ann and not have it curl back into Boston. I'm like, good, I guess, that they're worried about that, but disgusting that that's the answer at the moment, is to just jettison it so fast and hard we're going to get it back. So I got into it really through kind of an environmental flavor, is where I first started. I could go on, but that was really the nexus of a 7-year-old going, that's messed up.
I got to go back to that real quick, because how the hell does a river catch fire in the first place? That
Big old oil slick from, not necessarily what you would say just a petroleum refinery in Cleveland, just all the various manufacturing processes. I don't want to blame any of the particulars that would have been using solvents, but all those things float on the water. Somebody throws a lit match or a cigarette butt, and there's enough of it floating that it just catches fire. And
boom.
The water's beneath it, so it doesn't put the fire out.
Boom.
It's like an oil fire on the top of your kitchen stove. It just kept going. It was awful. It happened twice. You'd think, well, once they'd get the message, but no.
It's funny, as I think about this a lot. My parents are in Europe right now, and they're sending me all these pictures. It's all these beautiful rivers. And you look at Western civilization, probably civilization in general. You go find a clean water source, you park up, you call it home, because that is sustenance, that is life. And last time I was in Oregon, I was actually in a town called Ashland. And the thing I really enjoyed about Ashland was the entire city kind of was built around this creek that comes down the center of it. It just has this life-sustaining artery that is so indicative of how humans, animals, mammals, all of us, like life is able to survive, and it needs water. So what the hell? How did the waterways also become the dump for industry? And at what point in someone's critical thinking process was that okay?
Wow. I'm not sure I know the answer to that, to be honest. I mean, I have read, and I think I find it fascinating, Stephen Solomon's, Water, A History of Civilization, looks at the whole of human history through the prism of how did water affect what was happening then with regard to civilization, as you say. And, as early as people started living in high density, the first thing they had to worry about was sufficient supply of water. So it happened in the Tigris-Euphrates, the so-called Fertile Crescent, where there was more water then than there is today. You bring in people, and of course, you have a collective problem of human waste. And so you could look at that, and then if you go to an agrarian society, depending on what you consider industrialization, that creates those same problems of pollution. But it isn't until you hit the industrial age, which again, Stephen Solomon has a very interesting take on single most important human invention in his view is the steam engine. But I won't bore you with that. It's a good read. But at that point, then you're mining coal, you're bringing fossil fuels into existence, and you're able to harvest the power of water and the power of water to do a variety of things. So all of a sudden you've got more than just human waste, I'll call it, I keep using that term, or animal waste. You've got these byproducts of industrial processes. So I think people did what they'd long come to do. They sort of threw their bucket in the river. And so I think sociologically it had become okay to get rid of that smelly stuff. Somewhere, probably around the middle of the 18th century, I think it became sort of the norm in Western Europe to put your waste bucket into the river, downstream of where you were inletting. So funny you would mention, the Danube was a horrible story. I mean, the Blue Danube just became this horror story of pollution from its headwaters to its tail. So I can't answer your question specifically. When did that become okay? I think socially it became okay, quite a ways back. And you can look at China, same way. The Grand Canal was their big inner connection of commerce on their eastern side, and it too became kind of a tailwater slough of all the various merchant marines tossing their bucket over the side. So it comes with industrialization, but it begins with the idea that water carries things that we don't want away, smelly bits.
Yeah, I spent a fair amount of time in India, and it's customary to go bathe in the Ganges. At the time, it was considered the body of water with the highest concentration of bacteria in the world, because it was all just human defecation and dead babies and just all kinds of crazy stuff. And millions of people are using this as a water source. And so this is a thing, right? The world's hospitals are filled with people that have some sort of waterborne disease. This is obviously a thing. There's malaria. There's all kinds of things that come from waterborne diseases from mosquitoes. But then how much of this do we see from people that are just ingesting dirty water? How much of this is leading to it? Because this water crisis is a crisis for clean water. I mean, the oceans are filled with water, but we can't live off of that.
Right. Most of human disease is caused by waterborne ingestion of waterborne disease. Giardia and various other, forms of coliformic bacteria are, that's the it. The beauty of, kind of Western treated drinking water is that we've learned to wipe all that stuff out. Our water's not antiseptically clean, it's just clean of the things that would cause us amoebic dysentery and those sorts of things that, sound pretty mild. You can have a bad batch of diarrhea type of thing. It kills more people than anything else on the planet. So, yeah, it's a big deal. It's a really big deal.
So I live in California, where we don't have any water right now. And there's some argument about how that came about. Some people blame the environmentalists for not for standing in front of making too many dams in the high Sierras, and some people can just blame Mother Nature. But we're short on water, and we're starting to become very aware of it, because when it hits your own front yard, backyard, you're not your lawn is browning. It's suddenly a personal issue, right? So I want to get back a little bit further and talk about how this global water crisis started to emerge, and what it looks like. Because microcosmically, my neighbors are pissed that they can't water their lawns. I think that's indicative of a much bigger problem.
Yeah. The global water crisis really finds its nugget first in human population growth. There's simply a larger number of people on the planet, creating really as much a bigger footprint for land use than anything else. So you deprive forested areas of their ability to capture rain from the atmosphere to the ground, into the ground. If you take down tropical rainforest in the Amazon, for example, you begin to destroy the whole ecosystem that produces water. Redwoods, for instance, grow in California, not off the rain that falls from the sky, but off of the moisture they harvest from the ocean air. They create their own source of water, if you will, from ocean mist. So they're a really interesting little ecosystem unto themselves. They're my favorite tree. But that said, the crisis in water comes from a lot of shifting of demands on water, and the ways in which water is available. You have the desertification of the surface of the earth. I mean, we're increasing the area on the planet that it basically no longer receives a sufficient supply of moisture to sustain plant life and eventually human life. And to some degree, that's happening in California. I mean, on one level, I want to rebut you and say, well, California does have water thanks to the work of a lot of really good people, both for agriculture and for you to sit there and drink tap water. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't have no water. It's again a question of social engineering. You've gotten used to the idea, or your neighbors have, that they should have a green lawn. That's you said, when did it become okay to dump your industrial stuff in the waterway? When did everybody start wanting to grow a green patch of grass? That became kind of a bourgeois thing. I live in Oregon. I don't have a green lawn. I have a house in Stockton. I happily let its lawn die. I hate cutting grass, but I kind of generally hate grass. But
well, it's an English countryside tradition, and from a place that used to have more rain than they knew what to do with.
Well, it still does, but it's a sort of a manor home elite sign of wealth. So I think that that's a good piece of it from a cultural perspective. And again, that's sort of the social engineering. My wife decried when we moved into this hillside home, but there's no yard. And I said, isn't that great? There's no yard. There's no place to put a yard. I had that one, nailed. In other words, I was not going to become an urban farmer of grass. I'm not bragging there. I'm saying that that was sort of my value set in that I didn't give a darn that that place wasn't compatible with grass.
Oh man, I'm right there with you on that. I mean, we put in raised beds. We've got food instead of lawn, and we're doing our part. My kid's growing up around earthworms and vegetables and produce, and it's on a drip system. And what a better use of water is to create organic food, even on a micro scale. But so
I could give you a quote here to take, and it was Patricia Mulroy's out of Southern Nevada Water Authority, and she's a preeminent thinker and forward thinker. She said, put it this way, having a green lawn, grass lawn in Las Vegas is the equivalent of marching down the streets of Anchorage in the middle of winter in a bikini. It just doesn't make sense. I thought that was hysterical. She did that to Congress. It was like, that's a great line. And that's somebody who's clearly thinking, what is the context in which I live? Where am I? Does it make sense?
So there's a couple pieces to this, and I want to let's go macro and then kind of come back in a little bit. It seems like the United States hasn't really been hit by the water crisis, but globally this is huge, right? Like we're seeing huge shifts in civilization in Africa. The Syrian crisis, if you will, and some of the stuff in the Middle East. A lot of people are saying it's actually because of water. So can we talk about what's happening with water internationally and how that's changing kind of geopolitical landscapes and creating refugees and some of these really big things that you hear about in the news? I wasn't surprised, but I got to say, it was still shocking to really start to peel back the layers and understand how much of this has to do with water and climate and things that we take for granted, living in a place where you turn on the tap and it's there.
Right. Well, there's a lot of good news there, actually. I mean, there's a terrible crisis in the world of availability of fresh water, but people tend to interact pretty well around water. It's just so vital. And you cannot go 3 days without drinking water. You can go 30 days without eating food, but it is the sustenance thing on the planet. So you see that even if Lebanon and Israel, let's say, are at complete odds with each other, they cooperate around the River Jordan. It flows from Lebanon into Israel, for example. And then you look at the situation between the Israelis and the Palestinians. I mean, it's horrible, it's horrific in terms of human living condition. But the one thing the Israelis don't do, even when they're as mad as they can be at the Palestinians, is they don't cut off absolutely their water supply. So you see cooperation around that. The same thing could be said of China and Russia. They've had real problems on their northern border. The same could be said of the U.S. and Canada, the U.S. and Mexico. There's a lot of transboundary water issues. The Columbia crosses up in my neighborhood. There was a lawsuit brought by Mexico around Mexicali for the crossing of the All-American Canal, a false river, but then also the San Pedro River that wanders in and out of Mexico and Arizona, United States. So a lot of cooperation there along with the crisis. But you do, coming to the crisis part of it, you see an awful lot of water refugees. You see water wars that start and finish really, really quickly or threaten, and they're so onerous that people don't even want to take them on. I mentioned to Carl when talking with him the issue of South Sudan. Horrific as it was fundamentally a problem of water. The desertification of Western Sudan was pushing the nomadic farmers over into the agrarian portion where there had been sufficient water for growing crops, and it was the tension between those two tribal groups, the nomadic ones and the agrarian sedentary ones, that caused just horrors to occur, and you had effectively water refugees. They weren't, noticed or recognized that way because it wasn't that they couldn't get a glass of water, but it was their whole lifestyle based around their availability of water that forced it. So that's an issue. It's a huge issue in Western China. I can't properly pronounce the name of that ethnic group out in Western China, but the western part of China up against Afghanistan used to be quite fertile with water, and now it's a desert. And so the lack of water there has pushed those ethnic minorities to the east. I keep having to do my compass, and that's caused a great deal of tension as they've moved into urban areas.
And is this desertification something that kind of naturally swirls around and we're seeing happen historically, like in different regions, or is this something different? Like, is it because we're cutting down trees and adding to it? Are there changes in climate? Is it all the above? Like, why is this happening?
I'm afraid it's sort of all of the above. I'm no expert on all the dynamics, but it's the increase in global temperature. But it really began with taking down the wooded forests. It changes the pattern of accretion and depletion of atmospheric moisture. And so it's that change, and it can be the change in the soil horizon. That's what happens in the Amazon as you take away those trees, and suddenly the rain can't penetrate the ground, and it runs off rather than percolating in. And one of the things people don't focus on is of all the world's freshwater resources, about 1% are in rivers and streams, about 3% are in lakes, and 96% of the available freshwater resources are in what I do, groundwater. It's the water that has percolated into the earth and is staying there, or is there for some resident period of time.
Right.
Again, Orange County, where you're sitting, used to grow oranges, mined out the groundwater to make oranges, and by the 1920s, that was beginning. They were mining out water faster than the Santa Ana system could put it back. So by the 1950s, you really saw the end of oranges in Orange County. I think I could take you to the last 3 trees that are there just for posterity's sake.
Yeah,
and
yeah, no, I think.
And yet, sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think I've actually seen them. I've been to a lot of the old places. I mean, there's some avocado groves left, but I mean, now it's pretty much like houses, suburb. And that party's over. The ship has sailed. I want to understand this aquifer bit a little better, because people, I would hear this and say, oh, great, well, there's plenty of water underground then, we're fine. So what's the state of the aquifer, and what that means? Like, where's this groundwater? How accessible is it? Are we drilling into it too fast? And are we polluting it potentially? And we get into fracking and all that kind of stuff. But I just, help me understand what aquifer access to water is like with these kind of groundwater resources.
Okay, that's a good open-ended question. The aquifers are not uniform. It depends on the nature of the geology beneath your feet. And so in one area, you may have a nice sandbox that you put your straw into, your well, and there's quite a bit of open space in the material in the subsurface. So there's a lot of water. That's true in Orange County. If I go up into the Sierras, I could do the same, but I'd be in fractured rock, and it would have very little storage, so I might quickly draw down what water is available there and leave it dry. The water in the Central Valley of California, in the southern Central Valley, is being overused to support agriculture. It's being used in an unsustainable fashion at this time. And that's why there's been new laws passed in the state to say, you just can't keep on doing that. It's got to come to an end at some point, or you've got to bring it into balance, because this is way out of balance. There's a tremendous amount of water down there, in the millions of acre feet. It's hard to describe just how much water is there for people, because that aquifer system is over 2,000 feet deep. However, when you reach about 1,500 feet in depth, you begin to get to water that is so high in salts that it becomes really unusable for human consumption. It can be done, but it becomes expensive, and you've got to start asking yourself, is that where we should be? We need to live off the freshwater resource that's on the top. So aquifers are available almost everywhere in the United States. The High Plains Aquifers, it's called, across from Nebraska down into Texas. Its technical name is the Ogallala, has been what has supported corn and wheat and other crop production, cotton, all the way down into Texas. And it's been overused and utilized. Water's being taken out of it faster than nature is putting it back. And when that's happening, we call it mining groundwater. The beauty of groundwater water is it comes back through the hydrologic cycle, evaporates out of the ocean, rains on the mountains, snows on the mountains, comes back into the ground. But if you're pulling it out faster than it's being put back in, then you've got a problem. So that's aquifers. Now there's, again, good news there. People are managing aquifers. They're utilizing them as storage reservoirs and saying, well, if we've got a surplus of rainwater now here in the winter, let's see if we can grab that, catch that, and put it in an underground reservoir like our aquifer, where it's not going to evaporate as quickly. It's going to stick around a long time, and we can rely upon it in a bad surface water year like the last 3 or 4 have been in California.
Interesting. So, how does one do that? Are there ways to pool the water and just let it percolate down, knowing that the aquifer is going to catch it underneath? Like, how do you organize the capture of water, excess water, to dump into an aquifer? That's to me, that's fascinating.
It is often done through percolation basins. Was first done in the San Fernando Valley that I know of, just above Los Angeles, in the 1920s. And that was done by the city of Los Angeles to make sure it had a sustainable, reliable water supply, even when the Sierras didn't give them a good snow year. Orange County has the most sophisticated system, largest system on the planet for doing that. They divert the Santa Ana River, and have been doing so since the 1930s, into ponds, or simply putting up weirs, sort of a impediment dam to water flow. Weir meaning it just lets the water flow over top once it reaches that height, but in the pool of water created behind it, you enhance the amount of water that's percolating into the ground. And they were able to do that because the surface water had become detached from the groundwater due to all the pumping to make oranges. So the good news is you're living in probably the most reliable water supply in California. And they're doing all kinds of great stuff, but they do it through percolation basins. They excavated Anaheim Lake, sometimes called Krill Lake, I think, because it was growing up sort of krill shrimp at some point. I chuckle at some of the names. But that's the sort of simplest way people do it, is through percolation basins. But nowadays we do it through all sorts of things. We use what are called dry wells, a conduit, if you will, into the subsurface, filled with very permeable material. City of Modesto has been doing that since the 50s to sort of capture and rainwater harvest their stormwater runoff. They had a very small area of town that was running pipes to the river. Not necessarily a great idea, because runoff from surface streets is not clean. They are now addressing that, but what they did do was run almost all of it to the ground, and the ground acts as a natural filter cake, so it gets cleaned up pretty well. Some issues with that, but generally speaking, they're recharging an aquifer with it. And then in the extreme, people are now spending money to actively inject treated drinking water to the ground and then have it available to remove. It's got its own name called Aquifer Storage and Recovery. It's handled a little bit ornately here in the United States to put chlorinated water in the ground that's highly treated for drinkability. Seems a bit puzzling to me, but it's done because that's the source of water you have available. So you've got a water treatment plant in the winter that's capable of making more water than people need to drink or to water their lawns. So you run it at its high capacity when water's available, put it in the groundwater system. So in the summer, when there's the opposite, there's more demand than there is supply, you can pull that back out. You've stored it, and now you're recovering it.
How contained is this? Like, how long is it going to stay down there? I mean, once you dump it into your aquifer, it's not going to like run off into your neighbor's aquifer. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like,
That's what I was downstairs spending my time on this morning before coming up to chat with you. We look hard at that stuff to basically figure out that if we percolating in the ground? Is it going to, as I call it, rim out on some layer and become your neighbor's problem? It can be a big issue around crops. There are certain crops and trees are okay with having their feet wet. And like a willow tree is happy to have its feet wet, but an almond tree is not. So those are the things you watch out for when you're creating these engineered systems. Much like you're saying, you wouldn't want to put it in next to your neighbor or schoolhouse and suddenly have it flooding their basement. So yeah, it happens. I mean, there's goofs and slips, but nothing tremendously bad. I don't think we've had any groundwater failures like the Johnstown flood where you had a dam break and lots of people die. And it doesn't have those sorts of risks to human life. So it generally stays put. In a nutshell, it generally stays put. The proper outcome is that groundwater connects to surface water and discharges there. When a river is flowing in the summer, I always tell people, and it didn't just rain, that's groundwater you're looking at. It came out of the ground, seeped in along all across the area. So when we look at a system like that, if it's really functioning properly, we attribute about 10% of it to loss. It moves out of the system slowly, gradually, into its natural sort of course. It doesn't stay put. And believe it or not, that's a lower loss factor than water sitting behind a dam because of the evaporative loss. Yeah, everybody, in the laity sort of doesn't realize, oh yeah, there's an awful lot of water. It's just going back up into the sky.
Yeah, but where am I going to take my jet skis? So
I'm not saying. I mean, storing a pound of water has lots of recreational value to people. I'm often struck by that. How your neighbor's lawn is one example of people's expectations around water availability. The other is once you put a dam up and somebody thinks that's their lake. By golly, you've got people screaming up in the Sierras right now that, hey, I had lakefront property. Where'd my lake go?
Totally.
And they're not legally entitled to that lake. It just happened to be there.
Well, that's something I've tripped on a lot is, the recreation element around drinking water. So, you got these boats putting in oil slicks in water that has been dammed up to, help civilization survive. And this is supposed to be drinking water for our community. I mean, is that a problem with pollution when you start using these lakes recreationally? I know that the engines use water for coolant and it brings up their temperature and stuff like that. Like, is that a big enough problem to talk about, or is that just kind of like inconsequential?
That's inconsequential. Yeah.
Great, good. So keep having fun, right?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah,
Got
there's
it.
nothing about that's problematic. They don't let you boat in the supply reservoirs that are lined up right near you.
Got it.
They let you into the ones that are treated, and human contact is not a problem. I mean, the sad part is some of them pollute up enough that they have to say, "Hey, no swimming." That's sort of, but again, in the big scheme of things, that's pretty inconsequential.
So
let's favor of it.
Yeah, well, right, exactly. Let's talk about the math real quick, because you've laid out a case that we're taking water out faster than it's percolating in, so we're mining water in a lot of the aquifers in the United States. So how much of that is agriculture? How much of that is human consumption in, say, like suburbs? And where can we balance that budget so that this problem doesn't get any worse? And what can we do in our lives to fix that?
It's in balance in a lot of places. So that's the good news. There are some major areas like the High Plains. The southern Central Valley is in poor straits. Fundamentally, agriculture uses about 85% of human water use. And so urban industrial uses about 15, split between those guys. You and I don't actually use up in human consumption all that much water because we take it in and we discharge it out in a different form. So you could say, well, the deprivation, the overharvest of water is about in that proportion, but it really depends on your place location. In the southern San Joaquin, it's really, really heavily on ag because there's not that many people live there. But if I go up to San Luis Obispo and Los Osos, where those aquifers are in crisis, that's people. That's almost 90% human need. Same thing up in Monterey. A little fun fact, I think the most valuable water in California, and therefore probably the United States, is on the Monterey Peninsula. They're just that tight for water availability. They're not connected to any of the big federal state projects, so they don't have the ability to just bring it in from somewhere else. Ag's got a handle on most of the water available in the Salinas River Valley. So you've got a lot of very rich people, and a lot of them, that need water. So it's a really high trigger point. There's plenty of others, but that's the one I've been watching in the news. They're looking at ocean desal. I mean, San Diego would be the case, perhaps, but they've got access to state and federal water off of a number of projects, thanks to their interconnection. So the answer, I think, coming back to your question, was it depends on where you are, but by and large, you could say it's about that split, 85-15, between ag and urban overall in terms of overtake.
So what I hear there is, if I think, okay, well, are we in any immediate danger there? It sounds like we can step up into some efficiencies on the ag side and make huge things happen if that math continues to slide and we start, having tougher and tougher water years. Is there hydroponics? Like, what do you do on the ag side to stop the bleeding? And what do you do on the urban side to stop the bleeding?
Right. You move towards high water efficiency agriculture, and you also move toward appropriate agriculture for the climatic zone. Just sort of like Pat Mulroy's comment about why would you grow grass in Las Vegas? There's certain crop types that, except for locality of need for the crop, I'm thinking of, say, cows, and you got to give them feedstock like corn or alfalfa. It doesn't make sense to grow a lot of that where it's super dry, because those crops take a fair bit of water to grow. So you would grow crops that are more climatically balanced to where you are. But the number one, I think, piece that we can do right now, and we are doing in the United States throughout, but particularly in California, is improving agricultural water use efficiency. And it has, it's a win-win-win. You get higher yield out of it by doing good things with the water, that is in terms of its mineral qualities and so forth, before you put it on the crop's happier. You can fertigate, as they call it, which is putting the proper amount of nutrient into the water you're putting on the crop through these advanced systems, so you don't have a blush of excess fertilizer hitting the groundwater, so you don't pollute the groundwater that is so vital, and you use less water. So increased yield,
Right.
Lower pollution, and less water used to do it. It's just a total win. Now, what's the problem, so to speak? It takes money to do that. Mm-hmm. Not too much money. What you see happening right now in all of U.S. agriculture is kind of classic capitalism. It's a good thing. Money is moving in to fix a problem. Mm-hmm. Because if you can fix the problem, you can get more value out of that cropland than the fellow who was doing it and had to do it through low efficiency agriculture because he didn't have enough money to do high efficiency agriculture. So, I'm in favor of small organic local farming, and that's where you want to see collectives, cooperatives come together. And I'm endorsing that in some of the work I'm doing with growers, is saying, hey, let's all get everybody together and do this project. Yeah, it's going to cost $100 million, but you need to spend that because you'll make that $100 million back and then some in short order if you gather yourselves together.
That's interesting. And the capital is lining up to be able to support that, which really helps.
Yeah, it's like saying to somebody, I'm going to take a mortgage on my house. I can afford to pay this back. You would do that, say, as an agricultural collective. You say, we're going to have an earnings stream off this that will, you capital source, you bank. There are plenty of agricultural lending banks. We're asking you to take a risk with us on our ability to do this. So that's a really, really big one because, as I say, ag is the number one user of water. As I've had to argue with my own family, what's bad about that? People have to eat. They have to drink water first, but they've got to eat. So, and we got to grow enough food to feed ourselves and be a net exporter of food to the world. We have, as a country, we have a surplus of water compared to other places. So we really should be exporting food. to places that have less water.
Yeah.
So, and then on the urban side, let's get to people. You want me to keep talking? I'll gotta keep going.
No, I love it. Love it.
Okay. People, it's water efficiencies. It's, what are you using your water for? Length of shower, of course, is a small piece one can give to their teenager. I've had 3 of them, so I'm now out of that period of, geez, really a 20-minute shower? But it gets to, are you an urban farmer of food, or are you an urban farmer of cosmetics? And is that appropriate? And you see water efficient appliances are valuable, and just the consciousness around water efficiency. So it's a lot of really social engineering. You can create technologies that are a low flush toilet, right? But it's really people becoming aware of their impact, and that every little bit counts in terms of use of water. You see it in signage in hotels, people making people aware. Yes, please, use our water, take a shower, but use it reasonably. Use what you need.
Yeah, you get a lot of that in, say, like Australia, where they never really had much water, and so they're a lot more conscious of it. I mean, we just, we kind of have the curse of the rich, right? Where we were so abundant in these natural resources in the United States that, it's hard to come back from, because once you got something, you take it for granted. There's one technology I want to talk about real quick. You mentioned it, but it seems like kind of the Hail Mary of fresh water, which is desal. And, I've heard a lot of problems with desalination in terms of, A, it's really expensive to do it, and then B, the brine, the sludgy, salty stuff that comes out as a byproduct. We don't know what the hell to do with it. We don't know where to store it, and it's like toxic because it's just too salty. So, is there hope in desal? Is it something that could help give us more clean water and give us a sustainable kind of bump in this, or is it still just the tech's not there?
Well, open ocean desal, which is what I think a lot of people think about, is super energy intensive. It just takes, and so its carbon footprint is horrid, and that's where I start with it. It's extremely expensive because it takes a massive amount of power to do it, and it's the energy cost and the cost, energy-wise, of pulling the water, pushing it through these high pressure membranes to get the salts out. And then you have 2 sides of it in terms of ecological consequences. First, you have to worry about the open ocean intake, and that's the big dispute around Huntington Beach. They're trying to do one there, and how would they do it? And mechanically it becomes very complicated. And the same thing up in Monterey. They'd like to do one, but Monterey is one of the most amazing oceanic sea life ecosystems anywhere on the planet. And so to have that disrupted is, of course, a big deal. So you get the intake.
Do you mean like the intake, like sucking fish and seals and stuff into the machinery there?
Yep. What are you doing to the habitat? What quantity of footprint of habitat are you degrading by way of doing that? Because an awful lot of the food chain starts beneath the surface of the ocean. So even with a non-open ocean intake, the Japanese like to do it in a kind of a sand filter bed. You destroy the benthic communities, it's called, near that intake. But the exhaust side is a bit of a problem. You have to, it's a bit like, but not as bad as my example of what I didn't do when I was at MIT. I didn't study how to send sewage out fast enough to not have it come back landward. It's, in my mind, it's okay to figure out how fast, how much of that brine, that highly concentrated brine, do I need to eject where, for the ocean to dilute it in a fashion whereby it's not problematic. Because a desal plant, in the big scheme of things, is a tiny microcosmic version of what the sun's doing right now, evaporating water out of the ocean, right? And creating a locally higher salt concentration near the surface of the ocean or oceans. So you just got to mix it off quick enough that it's not problematic. But it is problematic. I mean, right around that outfall, you're going to create a different environment. So it's not perfect, but I'll tell you, a big piece of the Los Angeles area's water supply is very smartly done by desaling not ocean water, but saline waters in the ground. So you've got water that's brackish because it came in very slowly. It's been around a long time. So Eastern Municipal, Western Municipal water districts out in the San Bernardino area and such, they pull up brinish water. It's just slightly above what you'd like to drink. They desalinate it, and then they have to ship that brine that they make, that's much lower in volume and concentrate, down to the ocean. So the most expensive thing in the area is the brine line that runs along the Santa Ana River and out to the ocean outfall down past Fountain Valley.
That's interesting.
That's a very local example for you. So that type of desal, perfect sense. And if you got to the crux of it in the crucible and you needed to do that, say in Tulare or Bakersfield, makes perfect sense. The problem with them is they're inland. They've got an salt accumulation problem already. I will not be surprised if we see a trans pipeline that goes out to the ocean around like Point Hueneme, I think, is a logical place to take it out. They used to look at taking oil out that way, so they probably would take brine out that way in a pipeline. And again, put it in the ocean, eject it at a rate and in a location where it's not going to disrupt a ecosystem. So that type of desal, I think, is probably going to continue, is going to propagate, and it has its place and its use. But open ocean desal is only going to work well in certain areas. The Middle East uses it heavily. You see silly things in the United Arab Emirates where they've got fountains. It's Las Vegas-like, and they're doing that with ocean desalinated water. You're like, wow, that is just. Yeah. That is thumbing your nose at Mother Nature because you've got the money to do it.
Yep, our money, really. Keep driving SUVs. So, all right, so let's talk about what the sane solutions could be for bringing some balance to this, potential water scarcity. It sounds like some areas are just fine, some areas are having problems, and so we can get efficiency in our ag. Desal through the groundworks, desal open ocean sounds like it's still energy intensive and not really great. Anything else? Any other kind of big tech solutions that are up and coming or out there that we haven't mentioned?
Yeah, the really big one that's again paramount in your area is already being done is it has kind of an ick factor for a lot of people. Social engineering is important and that's taking and reclaiming wastewater, putting it back to potable uses. So the same kind of technologies that do desal are used in that highly treated reclaimed water, as we call it. You run it through reverse osmosis. Again, it takes a lot less energy to desalinate and clean up that water than it would the open ocean. I mean, just orders of magnitude less energy. And so it creates a reliable, sustainable source. As you take a sip of water, you and I are going to give it back. And so that amount that we don't use becomes recoverable. Los Angeles just announced 3 or 4 days ago, I pushed a note out saying it's about to embark on creating the world's largest reclaimed water project to restock its water supply into places like the San Fernando Basin, the San Gabriel Basin will be their storage reservoir, if you will. It'll produce some natural filtration beyond all this HEPA filtration and enable people to reuse it. And I think the further into that we get, the more sensible we'll get about it. The Australians, for example, they do what they call aquifer storage treatment and recovery. They're willing to put reclaimed water in one location and rely upon the natural treatment filter cake that a groundwater aquifer can be and take it out over here. Whereas we say, okay, we got to put it in here and take it out here. It's sort of this bubble of water we've put in, and we don't count on the ground for treatment. They're saying, well, why on earth would you chlorinate that water? We'll put in the sort of cleaned up raw water over here, we'll take it out over here, and then we'll treat it to make sure it's bacteria free or it's got the right mineralogical balance. I mean, we as engineers do all sorts of things to make your water taste good. let alone be safe for you to drink. So a lot of good stuff happening around that idea of, let's use it a few times. I mean, I think water in Orange County, it's reckoned that it's touched 3.5 times before it's allowed to go out to the ocean.
Wow,
It's
great.
just recycled that well. It is the best system. Singapore lives on reclaimed water. They have probably the most advanced system in the world. It's run by Thames Water out of London. So lots of good stuff there, and if you can afford it.
So you treat it for bacteria. I mean, we're talking about toilets flushing. I just want to be kind of a little graphic here. You flush your toilet, that's going into some system. So now your what do we call black water or brown water goes
That's
in.
black, yeah.
That's black water. It goes into some system where it's now being treated and filtered, and then that runs through. And then is that what they call gray water? Because I know that they
No.
water the lawns, and they a lot of the kind of cosmetic stuff is definitely coming from that type of water. But I don't know if that's the drinking water. Is that the case in places like Singapore or Orange County?
No. Drinking water is always what we call blue water. There are about 5 colors. I'll probably get it wrong, but black water would be raw wastewater. Gray water would be like rainwater harvesting or shower water, something that's had human contact or has contacted the natural environment in a way that you would expect it to have an increased pollution load. So if I took water off the street, it would fall into that area of its gray water. If I've got green water, that's raw water. That's water from a river, a lake, something that's unfiltered. It's not expected to have a particular pollutant load due to its origin, but that's green water. Then you get into purple water. Purple is what black gray water can become if it's treated through a wastewater treatment plant. And that's what we're talking about. Kind of purple water is water that's being treated, is treated to some level, and it's a very high level if it's going to be reused, in order to get taken into blue water, which is treated, drinkable, potable water, certifiable under EPA standards that it's safe for human consumption. So that's kind of the spectrum of waters. And really, black water and gray water need to go through a purple water process to be used for human consumption. But both of them, gray water can just be used directly on ag. That's fine because it's at a light contact, in general terms, with any kind of process. So rainwater harvesting into your garden makes perfect sense. If it's contacted your roof, it's gray water. If it's just come out of the sky, of course, it's just rainfall. But if you see new homes being built, I'm not sure how big a footprint it has, where their shower water is separated from their toilet water, and therefore they can harvest gray water versus black water out of the building and use them differently, send them in different directions. So you see a lot of golf courses and stuff that rightly advertise, and they really all should be using purple water, if they can. If they have access to a source of treated, reclaimed water, then that's what they should be doing at a minimum. Some of them sit on top of abundant aquifers, so I don't have a big problem with them putting it on the ground and away they go.
So the piece that you had mentioned that the Australians are doing, like we're dumping it straight into an aquifer, pulling it back up. So are we taking water, making it purple, and then putting it back into the aquifer and letting the sand and the rocks do the rest of it? What level of water can we dump into the aquifer if we want to store it for a non-rainy day, a dry day?
The way they do it, they take purple water and inject it. And they limit the degree to which they treat it, which is a good thing. In other words, they don't go, I've got to chlorinate it, aka disinfect it of bad bacteria before they put it in the ground. They go, well, the bacteria don't travel in the aquifer. They won't propagate. That's what the aquifer is good for. It'll filter those things out. We're not going to take it out right where we put it. When we put it in, we demand that it be pristine and blue. And so we put it in and take it out in the same place with the naive concept that we're removing the same water that we put in. Molecule for molecule, it's not the same water. But so that's one of the big criticisms I have of the way we attempt to do it in the United States, we essentially overregulate the idea of putting water in the ground. They made Orange County look at a 6-month time of travel between where they percolate water in that's super high treated. I mean, you can drink the stuff by the time they're done with it down at the groundwater replenishment system. They will offer you a glass of it. But they demanded that when it goes into these ponds, that it have a 6-month time of travel to the nearest extraction well. Kind of goofball, but that's what they did. Now they've shortened that to 2 months if you do tracer tests that demonstrate it. But it's over-regulation in my mind. That is inhibiting the growth of an industry that needs to happen, because things have gotten so bad in a couple places in the United States now with urban demand that people have gone to what we call direct potable reuse. So they're highly treating purple water and taking it all the way to blue water and putting it into the pipes that people drink from. And that has a hard time even with me getting past the, wow, you're really leaning hard on the technology. If there's a breakdown or a missed actor in the water treatment scheme, chemical I mean by that, then you're ingesting it. And that's happening in Las Vegas, New Mexico, and can't remember the unfortunate little town in Texas that was forced to do it first. And you've got people there with known human needs. That's where we are with certain localities. They didn't have enough backup redundancy in their water supply, and so they've ended up basically going to direct potable. I don't think that's the end of the world, but it's not, as a water engineer, that's not a desirable outcome. That's not what we should be. We can do better.
Let the earth do her part too, and it sounds like that could be a public health disaster. I mean, a lot of the benefits that we've had, in our growing civilization has been on sanitation and all that, and that's leaving a lot for human error. And we know people are flying over the country with armed nuclear warheads by accident, and at the highest level things can go wrong. So I'd rather not drink poop. I think that's a pretty sensible position there. So,
but even that said, you've got to. That's what a lot of people in California are putting a lot of energy into, is having people not look at it as drinking poop. I mean, that's really not what we're doing. And it's creating mantras like showers to flowers rather than toilet to tap. You have to adjust your mindset to it, and it'll happen up here in the Pacific Northwest, where we're still blessed with abundant rainfall on the west side of the Cascades. But on the east side of the Cascades, I think it's probably a virtual certainty, which is a semi-arid region, just like Southern California. They're already doing it. Yeah, up in Spokane, Washington, they're into indirect potable reuse. So we really have to engineer our way of thinking that if we want to sustain the lifestyle we've become accustomed to, and I think we can do that, we need to be willing to look at more sources of water, reusing water. So
I love it, man. Personally, I feel like I've learned a hell of a lot today, and I want to thank you for your time. This is great. I'm like geeking out over this because it is a huge thing, and it's something that's not going away anytime soon. So we got to look at it. It's part of our social engineering. It's part of our collective future. So I think that there's a lot of things that we learned here today. John, how can people find you? You got a website. How can people find your work?
My own work is. I found it at ePureWater, www.e-purewater.com is our website. And of course, they can best find me that way. I'm in California a lot. I'm in Oregon a lot of the time. Split my time there as far as working goes. I have a few published papers and presentations. They'd be somewhat obscure for your audience to find, and the subject matter would generally be quite obscure. But I have published a few things in professional journals. So that's really how I'm best found. I'm happy to get emails, respond to them, and help people out where I can.
Love it. Love it. Well, keep doing the good work that you're doing. I think it's very valuable, and we need it. There's guys like you that are doing things that are keeping us, being able to live our lifestyles. A lot of people take for granted, and yes, we should be mindful of all this, but also let's look at the new tech. Let's look at the opportunities to change the systems in a way where we can keep having fresh water and not make it a problem. We don't want to have a refugee crisis here in America. And so I think that's a big part of the future. I want to thank you, and I'd love to kind of have you on the bat phone as my water guy as
Sure.
questions come up in the future. Awesome.
Happy to do that. Okay.
Thanks so much.
There are some more resources out there, and if you'd like to provide those to your audience, I gave those over to Carl the other day. So
great. Yeah, we'll put them in the
post-close.
Great. What we'll do is, if you're listening to this as a podcast, go over to well.org and we'll tie the resources to the video of this interview, and we'll put them all there. Excellent.
Terrific.
John, thanks very much.
You're welcome. Nice to meet you.
It's a pleasure. Hope you enjoyed it. Like I said, I got to geek out. I really needed to know some of these things, and I hope you also had some of those questions in your mind. I feel like we all know a little bit more about water, and tagged him to be my resident water guy because this subject will not go away. As long as we're thirsty, as long as we're growing food, water is an issue, and so learn from what he taught us, and I'm going to start implementing just some of the water measures in my own house and looking at some of the stuff locally. Turns out I live in the part of the world that has the best management of water. I didn't know, so lucky me. I'm going to start talking to some of the local people and digging deeper, if you don't mind me going there, into this water issue because it is an important one for all of us. Hope you enjoyed the show. Please love it up. Like I said, it's a new show, and we need ratings, so if you could go in and rate it wherever you're at, it helps me get this message out there more, and I will see you next time.